All right, I think we're good.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the SCA Coaches Corner. Tonight, we got a pretty fun show, and I think it's something that everybody who has started out in fighting or is about to start out in fighting has either gone through or is going through currently, and that is your first suit of armor, your first kit. We're going to cover a number of things within this. We're going to talk about some of the first armor that some of our coaches have had, as well as focusing on the practical lessons that we learned sometimes the hard way about the best way of approaching getting your own armor together. So everybody, if you turn on your let me see here, go to the gallery view just to show everybody here who's on tonight. So this is gonna be kind of a bit of a mishmash, but we really do want to focus on some of the lessons that we learned and recommendations, especially more modern advancements that will help people get into armor quicker. Get some resources to them and things to think about. And this is probably one of the best things to do via conversation like this, which is to get you on the right path and avoid having to waste a lot of time and money and frustration getting your armor together and then realize you went about it all the wrong way. So welcome everybody to the show. We got Brannos is going to be our host this evening, so I will pass it off to him.
All right. So we got a great group of people today. Tristan, I'm still seeing you on Facebook here. There we go. Now we got both of ours.
All right.
Sorry, little technical difficulties, but I'll while he's figuring it out, you can see what's going on. I'll keep talking. So I got two of really good friends that I thought were going to be great for this episode. Hjorlief, Sir Hjorlief, and Brannos Wolverine. I've had opportunity for Wolverine to work with her and see how she's really been out there helping put resources together for people and document it, and also help people get in, help the people that it's a little harder to get into armor sometimes because it's not necessarily something off the shelf isn't going to necessarily fit. And she's done a lot of work to try to help those people do that and get the information out there. So I'm happy she joined us on the show. And I got Sir Hjorlief, who moved away because he just couldn't handle being around me anymore. And so he had to move away. But he's the prime example of you drop somebody in the middle of the woods and can they start a group? And that's exactly what he did. Not only did he start a group, but he built a long haul in the middle of nowhere and has this just a great community. You went there, rented a space they could use even before he really had people that he knew was going to really join him. And now he has a dozen or so people and practices going every week and really growing North Shield and building a community up there. But one of the things he does is, it's a not a rich town, it's a college kids town, and that's the way we started in the SCA. And he's helping keep that idea alive by keeping stuff cheap, having loaner armor, having all of these things that the way we started, keeping it affordable. He's still doing that, and and in days of $1,000, $2,000 helms and all of this beautiful armor out of the Ukraine and out of the American armors and Indian armors and all these things going on, he's still helping people put together kits that they like, that fit them, that are comfortable for next to nothing, because they don't have a ton of stuff there. So I'm happy to have him here. And then of course we have Bess. Bess is she wanted to make sure everybody knew she is not an armorer. She doesn't put armor together for people. But I'm happy she joined us because she's like, I don't do any of this. And then she has all of this stuff that she's going to show and talk about. And I'm like, I didn't bring nothing. And so Bess is kind of probably cover some of the, what do you do if you're not an armorer? And what kind of things should you have around? And how did I make my life easy when I don't armor? And the best part, she's been doing this as long as I have. So It's truly amazing. So I think the first thing we're going to jump into is we're going to tell a little story about how we started. I mean, I know back when I started, I'll start it up that way everybody else gets a good feel. And back when I started, I didn't have a lot either, and I scrounged through everything, and I garbage dove all the time. I went through the time of we started with a buddy who we were just found some galvanized steel and found a break and just bent it into shape. So it was literally these flat shaped steel things. And then we figured out how to strap them to our, like, as legs. And we bent a nice flat piece of steel around our knee. And it was just absolutely awful. So I, shortly after all of that, I upgraded to carpet armor. So that was my upgrade. It was a nice shag. It did smell, and it was a very good day when I got rid of that and got into a gambeson that my wife was. I actually wasn't for. It was a loaner gambeson at the time from a group that I had joined, and I got a loaner helm from them for a good period of time, and a 16-pound sheet of steel for a shield, and we made knuckle bow, basket hilts with hockey gloves. So that's kind of my first armor. I've only done that much better since then. No, I've done better, but I will tell you that most of my armor is quite old. My helmet's probably 30 years old. So, sometimes you find a thing you really love, and just jumping off that, sometimes you can find something you really love, and everything else changes around it later as you go along. So I'm pretty happy now. For 12th century, 11th century kit and titanium mail and the whole gig. But I wasn't in a rush. So take your time, do it right, and just I think one of the most important pieces, and I think Wolverine will talk about this a little bit later, is find stuff that fits you and that you're comfortable, and get on the field, because there's nothing like it. So, Wolverine, you want to jump in on that subject? What did you start in?
So, what I started in, when you're ready,
He'll switch it.
He'll switch it. All right. I actually got very lucky when I started. Is I came into a group that actually had someone that helped everyone get into armor. And so I went in with another fighter. We picked up a side of leather. We went over to the guy's house and we cut out the leather vambraces. We cut out the leather thigh armor. We took plastic barrel and made the chest plates that way. He helped us put it all together. He had gotten a hold of some galvanized steel, I think scrap metal from one of the colleges, upgrading something. And we banged that into elbows and knees and put that all together. And so I actually came in at a very good point in the society where people were already progressing and I wasn't wearing carpet armor. So from there, though, I was about to go into college and I had no idea about how to sew. So I had this leather armor and metal and plastic, and I was fighting in t-shirt, jeans, and motorcycle boots because I didn't have a sewing machine. I didn't know what to do for a soft kit. I've still gained maybe a little bit more sewing ability trying to work on a 15th century, 16th century landscape kit. So a lot of that ends up being hidden now. But yeah, so I came in at a different point and it worked out fairly well with my first kit as compared to some people.
So, actually you're not the only person I heard use like motorcycle armor to do some of that stuff. I actually have a suit somebody gave me here that people use still, and it works out great. I've seen other guys actually use, there's an articulated motorcycle knee that they used for a while. They're not cheap though, and we found they did break after a while. So, but it is definitely a good way to get in and relatively comfortable. And especially some of them are mesh now, so they're not super hot and all of that other stuff. Hjorlief, What did you start in?
Man,
I think
started
Hjorlief was. Yeah, I think you were born in armor, were you?
Ah,
You had a little armor diaper and.
I started in plastic. Yeah. So my when I first started in 2001, my wife and I were like living in married housing at Northern, and I looked out the window and I saw these two dudes out there fighting. And I was like, man, what is going on? So like ran out there and talked to these guys. And pretty soon thereafter, we were like buying these black plastic barrels for like $5 a piece, and just making like chest pieces and elbow pieces and knee pieces and all kinds of great stuff. Actually, the apparent legs I made are still around. They're still in use. In fact, they get used to practice every week, and those are 20 years old. So it definitely stood up. But yeah, it was a great start. We just scrounged for all kinds of stuff because we were all broke. I mean, I think our monthly income at that time, because we were both like working like student jobs, we were full-time students, I think was probably like, I don't know, $600 a month or something. So it was tight. But we had found somewhere like this industrial conveyor belt that was getting thrown out at an iron ore mine. And we made these, I think we called them brigadines at the time because we were clueless. They were more like Lorica. They were more like segmentadas. But this was the most like bomb-proof armor. It was kind of heavy because it was like tractor conveyor belt rubber, like industrial conveyor belt rubber. But this was like if you were actually going to be in like an apocalyptic type scenario, this is what you'd want to wear because I'm pretty sure it'd stop a bullet. You felt like absolutely bomb-proof in it. Like we went to a Wars of Warlords, like our first one, and we were all wearing them, and it was just immune to damage. I mean, it was something.
Yeah, I tell you, that's I know we went right after. So I started wearing a gambeson, and then shortly after all the plastic started coming in. I remember a guy taking a barrel and literally cutting out the front and the back. I mean, just one giant piece on the front and the back, and wearing that quite a while. But I tried it once. I'm like, wow, you cannot move in this stuff, right? And I think we've come a long way there. So, but I'm gonna go back to Bess and see if she wore carpet armor or not.
In point of fact, I did.
Back
Back in 1986, the group that I was with, we had loaner and it was carpet. So I was in carpet for a while, and we did have somebody who had experience making armor and helped us do it. And I worked on a Spangen helm, which was the first helm. I say the first helm I made, really the only helm I ever made. And it was kind of like a top hat. But it worked. It worked for a while, and it was a good experience, and I enjoyed that. And then after my carpet armor, a friend made me some body armor, which was very nice, and I learned a very valuable lesson. Now we all have nipples, so this guy made me a body armor with a piece down the front and then two things that came out leather. I was fighting one day, and the metal pieces shifted. I just about lost a nipple. Like I really thought. So I learned from that, and my body armor, which I can show you later, is now just solid across the front, because really fighting shouldn't be painful like that. So those were my first two parts of armor. And then, you talk about your soft kit. Well, my soft kit was then and is now my workout tights and a long sleeve t-shirt. It's not fancy pantsy. And Brannos, you say that you were 11th and 12th century. I am early period SCA.
You know what? And that is perfectly fine. I think that's a good subject, actually. For you bring that up, Bess. I think that's actually a great subject line. Is I think sometimes there's some social pressure, and I know Wolverine would probably love to dig in this one too. There's this social pressure that we see everybody around us in all this beautiful armor that makes us almost feel like you can't go and do something because you only have a couple $100s to spend, or you're just putting stuff together the best you can put it together. I think it's key. Somebody's trying their best to get in armor and fight you, and that if you really don't enjoy seeing them struggle in that type of armor, or you don't like the way it looks, then the best way to do that is help them. And I don't care if that's, hey, I have an old pair of knees, I have an old pair of elbows, I have an old helmet, or if you have the money, then just help them. You know, nobody says you can't do that. And that could be, hey, I'm going to buy you a gambeson, or I'm going to buy you a tunic to put over your stuff. All of those things are, you know, instead of just complain, I strongly suggest you help, because they tell you what, if everybody complains, then we end up with nobody on the field. And that's the last thing I think any of us really want. So just be careful. I think all of you guys tried your best to look good. I mean, Bess is the same way. And you know, I love what Bess says is, you know, it's, you know, she's, you know, SCA period. And you know what, that is fine too. You know, the SCA wouldn't be nearly as good for me without Bess in it, because we got to grow up together and we got to fight together all the time, and we got to fight. We were busting our chops as unbelts together, and you know, I don't care. And I tell you what, and when I started, that's what I was. Here's my SCA armor, period. I used what I could, and then over a time period, it got better and better for me because I could afford it. And tell you the truth, I started liking the history piece, so I started doing that. So just be careful out there when you're looking at somebody and then you're putting down their stuff or whatever. And even if it's not to them and it's to somebody else, be careful there how you put that. It doesn't mean that you can't say, hey, you know, how can, you know, do you need help? Or, you know, hey, I have some pictures of, you know, I see you're doing some of your kit is 14th century. I have some pictures of a bunch of 14th century stuff, and even some links to some decent armorers and stuff. You know, that's the kind of thing that could drive them in that way, in a better way. That's my personal big warning. Wolverine, do you have anything to say about that? Because I know we've talked about that a little bit, right?
As far as getting people moving in an armor, yeah, sometimes it's just paying attention to what, or they lose me, or we lose him.
I got you.
All right. It's paying attention to what people around you too. I've seen people come in, they want to play, and we've got some loner, but then there's other people that want to play as well. And really, it's about getting people on the field and having fun, because that's what we're here for. So a lot of, like, I was telling them earlier that some of my getting into armoring was as a poor college student trying to help other poor college students, because I went from this town, or went from the city that had a bunch of people and people to help armor to a very small armored population. And we didn't have much loner gear at the time. We didn't have many fighters, but people would come in and there'd be no one really to help right off the bat. So it was like, well, we got to get people in armor. We got to get people on the field. So just trying to learn whatever technique I could and get people in armor for whatever was affordable. And then a lot of it was barrel plastic. A lot of it was using paracord because we didn't have rivets. Just what gets you into gear. And, you know, then you find ways to modify stuff, or you find ways to scrounge. You know, you go to Goodwill and you start tearing things off, purses, getting buckles, you get belts. You just start, you know, finding what you can find. And from there, you start building a community and building gear for people and getting them in armor.
Yeah, and I think you're nailing it there. You know, it's we do the same kind of thing. And since we're jumping into this side of the discussion, let's talk about some of the simple things. And I think you know, this is Wolverine, Hjorlief, and Bess will probably I'll have her jump in at the end. That's why Wolverine, you already started talking about it. Like, you know, grab some of the simpler things. You know, you can't afford these things, but you can afford paracord. You can afford, you know, belting out of, you know, I wouldn't go buy a brand new belt, but I usually go to the thrift store and buy belts, leather belts from thrift stores. And go to Goodwills and buy hockey gear or other things like that. Hjorlief, what kind of stuff do you usually, and you can go ahead. I know you do a lot of plastics and why don't you go ahead and talk about some of that stuff, because it's super cheap. You've put probably 20 people in armor, including helmets. Go ahead and talk about what you've been doing to help that.
Yeah, sure thing. Really quick, actually, I got to give a shout out to Master Vici, who's like mid-realm famous. He runs this group in the mid-realm called Vito's Minions. Him and Vito run it together. But that's who I got my inspiration from. I started making loaner armor before I moved and before I even needed it. But I was like, man, I'm just gonna start making stuff, because at the time I was really happy with my own kit. And so I'm like, man, I really like what like Vito and like Vici did, like making all these roaming kits out of plastic and just getting tons of people on the field, and they're all having a great time. And it was just super inspirational. And so the joke I always tell people is kind of like the Henry Ford joke, like you can have any Model T you want as long as it's black. Well, I'm like, I can help you make anything as long as it's Iron Age. So, and I don't actually do that to be a jerk. It's just because a lot of the Iron Age stuff is a lot more accessible, or it can be in the early period. And that is just because you get to do a lot of like hidden armor. Like, let me grab, so like, these are some elbows I made, actually, ironically, this pattern's kind of modeled off the first knees I made like 20 some years ago, but these are my current elbows now. It's just a volleyball pad sewed in to a plastic elbow. I've had these for, I don't know, probably going on 12 years now. And I started off with something like this, and then I went to I made some out of steel, and then I made some out of spring stainless, and then I bought some that were titanium, and I actually ended up back on these because they stay in place better. When the pad gets stinky, you can throw it into the washing machine. They're super quick to make. I've probably made, I don't know, 30 pairs of these for people. They're just super fast. They're pretty protective. I've got another version I make that there's a pattern for that actually is a full van brace. And so it's like got the elbow and then goes down further. So if you're going to fight grit weapon or, want a little bit more protection, but the materials to make something like this is really cheap. We can usually get somebody in armor, from the very beginning to their own, excluding helmet, like everything you need for under $100, with legs, knees, elbows, gorget, half gauntlets, the whole deal. There's a lot of that plastic, absolutely. But if you cover that up with like a nice pair of pants and a tunic and leg wraps, nobody can tell, and you look really good. And I think the most important part is you're not fighting your armor the whole time. That's armor that moves with you really well. As somebody who's accumulated a lot of loaner armor, I've tried to really get out of the habit of having really bulky stuff, because I think if you're fighting against your armor all the time, that's not as enjoyable of an experience. And so the faster I can get someone into their own armor and make it comfortable for them and fit to their own body, and so it works really well for them, that's really going to exponentially cause them to enjoy that experience a lot more and take a lot more joy from it. And so, yeah, I've got, these elbows, and I think there's a pattern for them that we can share later. I've got a knee that I got to give credit to Kel, Sergeant Kel, actually, His Excellency Kel. He's the current Baron of Donnershofen. But these are my plastic knees, kind of same deal. So I wear a rugby kind of crash girdle underneath, but then I just wear these. These are bomb proof, same deal. I had really expensive titanium knees, and I've had spring stainless knees, and I've done lots of stuff. And I just came back to this for the same reasons. It takes a hit better than any of those things. It stays in place because it's so light. When the pad gets smelly, you can throw it in the washing machine. They're super cheap to make. It's just, it just really compounds on. So I'm a super fan of those.
So you also do plastic shields and
yep.
Hockey pants and things like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can make a shield for somebody for about $15, which you can, and the secret is this, I'm super happy to share. You just go to Menards and you buy a 4x8 sheet of HDPE 1/4 inch plastic. The HDPE is important because that stuff doesn't shatter when it gets cold. It's a high density polyethylene, I believe. But yeah, you just basically cut out that shield. We hammer the bosses in my shop. It turns out a shield boss is a really accessible, kind of intro armoring project for somebody. You can kind of just like set them up with like, you put them on the shear, they cut out their boss, they go over to the dishing stump, they hammer it out for 2 hours. We get some bolts, we put them together, so yeah, you've got a shield that somebody can walk out of there with for under $20. And that's a good deal. So I've got just a pile of those too. And that all started because I was at Elro Metal buying metal for a helmet. And I was like, man, they had this scrap plastic they were getting rid of. This is before you could buy it at Menards. And I was like, man, this looks really good. And so I bought some. And there was a guy, Knight from Eldamir, Sir Casimir, who had fought with one that I had a chance to use one time in Brannos' backyard on a Tuesday night. And I was like, man, I'm going to buy that because it's super cheap. And I've never went back. I mean, I used to use aluminum shields like everybody else, but these plastic ones, I tell you what, you can decorate them, you can paint them. They look really good. I still wrap mine in leather edging. Most people have no idea they're plastic. They're shocked when I tell them. I'm like, yeah, man, that's plastic. They're like, oh, I thought it was covered aluminum or covered wood or this and the other thing. Nah. No, they're all plastic, man. These are $15 shields. And if you break one, you're not heartbroken because you're like, oh, whatever. And yeah, they've got about the same longevity as aluminum. They last for, I've got one that I just repaired last weekend. I had my 2 daughters on painting duty with me. And that one has been in loaner service since I made it in 2016. And that thing has gotten just beat on by tons and tons and tons and tons of people. And it finally developed a crack. But those are easy to patch too. You just take some more plastic and rivet here, rivet here, rivet here, rivet here, and ta-da! So it's going back into service on Tuesday.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, and I have seen these; they last forever. I've seen a lot of people like Barris and the guys up in Canada use puckboard, which is really close to the same thing. Good part is the rules state that you can't hurt somebody's edging, so your shield should not be sharp and not hurt people's edging, and plastic covers that, so you don't necessarily have to have edging on that plastic shield. It just rounds it around the edges a little and you're pretty good to go.
Yeah, we just round the edges with a torch and that's it. Yep.
So yeah, that's all great stuff, man. Just so everybody knows, one thing we're going to do is we're going to grab Hjorlief shared a bunch of patterns with us. We're going to grab those, put them in a document, and post that document on the site so that we have a place people can go get those. Wolverine, what kind of stuff you? I know that you had really kind of dug into like the sports gear or even cheaper gear you can just buy on online type thing.
So a little bit of that. First, real quick, I was going to show the body armor that we tend to make, and it's really just a bunch of slacks that you can't see in the lighting.
We can see it.
And then it's just paracord together on the inside. It's
Perfect.
Dead simple to make. It doesn't take a lot of work. You can get a barrel for like $30, if that, and just make segmentada essentially. But we do tend to have a lot of people that arms and legs are a little hard to get a hold of. So they'll go, and we have a place called Play It Against Sports. So it's just go to use sports store and try to find things that fit. And a lot of times what people will get is these are lacrosse elbows, and they cover the points. They're really light. They're not very bulky. They'll go get that. Perfectly legal. The other thing people will grab is ice hockey greaves. Now, the problem we run into with these a lot of times is they don't quite cover the knee as well, or they, the outside of the knee, it gets dinged a lot. So we'll sometimes take pieces of plastic and try to just block that off a little bit more so you aren't getting hit as hard. So that's some of the cheaper stuff that we've gone and found more locally to get people into gear that isn't always, apparent armor. And you can hide it under a tunic fairly nicely or hide it under baggy pants. The other thing that it's a little more expensive, but I use currently in my kit is actually as rib plates, Evo Shield rib plates. And they don't cover a lot of the torso, but they cover the side pretty well in their form fit. You open up the bag, you put it on with the shirt, and it just molds to your side. And I have another vest I put on that's some leather pieces that cover the front a little better, but most of the shots you take are going to be to your ribs anyway. So that's some of the sports gear we've found that actually works pretty well for our sport. I don't know if anyone has any other things they found, perhaps.
Well, I know I actually, we found, it's actually some of the HEMA gear out there at a reasonable price for knee armor that had somebody just started using that was really good. It's like 25 bucks for a pair, and great stuff. I was totally impressed. So we'll be posting some of that up as well and some links to those. But I'm going to switch over to Bess. So Bess, I'm sure you bought things here and there. You know, are there any, you know, overall this time, I'm sure you've kind of customized your pieces. Did you end up finding anything online, or you know, that you kind of worked for you, or did you kind of just bit and piece most of your stuff together? Oh, the most important piece. Go ahead, Bess.
So lots of women ask about, this is really the only thing that I bought online. This is a Jill. It's a woman's jock, and it's got this, it's set up like a guy's jock. You can wash it. It has a little cup that comes out. It's hard. Again, I find them for hockey and for lacrosse, but I'm sure anybody else can. Everybody talks about making them or buying them or like wearing weird ass things. And these are not uncomfortable. They're easy. They're not that expensive. When I moved to Florida, I bought a bunch of them and took them down with me to share with the female fighters because they don't really have hockey down there. I think that's really the only thing that I've actually bought. Everything else, I've kind of made, like, these are my arms, and I'm smaller than other people, so maybe the cost of leather is less for me. But this is the elbow and vambrace that I've got. Shoelaces cover, hold it across my elbow. Goalie hockey strings keep it across my forearm, and I've just put regular old padding for my forearm, and then up here as well. I am so lazy. I took some duct tape and, you know, made a circle and just kind of attached it like that. So that's kind of how I do it. I don't buy the most expensive or the thickest leather. I'll harden it with paraffin wax. And I find it really works well. Paraffin, you put it in a pan, you warm the pan up, and be careful it doesn't catch on fire, because it can. Keep it at low heat. I put it on my leather, and then I throw this into an oven for a little while until it all kind of absorbs. And again, the oven is really low, because one time I was getting bored of waiting for the wax to soak in. So I made the stove or the oven hotter, and it caught on fire. So learn from Bess. Everything at a low temperature, very low, because it is, as I say, it is or it can catch on fire. And it actually, it's pretty darn hard. It works. And the reason I like leather and I like paraffin is because it molds to your body. Eventually, you know, your sweat and the heat of your body molds it to you. I don't find it terribly heavy. Again, it could just be that I'm using thinner, I'm not using like sole leather or anything like that. I'm using relatively thinner leather, and then I just wax it up. So that's what I do.
Oh, that's great. I mean, and again, you're not an armorer, so you know, it's like if you can get through these things, and I think that's the big important piece, is everybody has to be a little careful. So while doing, I'm going to put a couple warning shots out there. While doing plastic, be very careful of heat. It's very low temp. Find your heat. You're actually better off boiling plastic if possible. Do not burn plastic. Burn plastic actually puts off you know, gases that are not good for you necessarily. So heat guns not bad, but as soon as you get into that spot where it's starting to smoke and things, you're probably way over where you need to be. A lot of the professionals use either vacuum forms at a perfect temperature, or some of the guys that do it by hand they'll boil it at that exact temperature because it gets the whole piece. So you cut your piece to size, you boil at a level, and then shape it. So That's the one of the warnings there. And wax is very flammable. So usually when you're doing any type of wax, you want to double boil. You want to be on an electric stove. And you want to watch the dripping on the bottom if you're actually waxing something inside of a stove. So put it on a very large pan or something to that effect. Be very careful. And again, when you're waxing, then the hotter you get, the actually more dry your leather gets and the more brittle it gets. So usually what we do is we heat up a thing of wax in a double boil, and then you heat up the leather to a level that you can actually paint the wax on, and that wax will pull right in. You pull the piece out, you paint it on, you put it back in, you pull it out, paint it on, put it back in, and then you find that almost exact place that you want. Bess, you do.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing about paraffin. When you're buying paraffin, when you take it out the box, it looks like this. It's best to shave it, because if you're putting a big block like this in your double boiler or in your pot, you need a goodly amount of heat. So I use a paring knife and I make shavings, and it melts. Buy a cheap, either a double boiler, but be prepared to never ever again be able to use the pot for anything. So I probably pick this up at a secondhand store or something like that. But you want to make shavings when you're using paraffin.
Yeah. All right. So just because I'm going to see, actually, we'll jump to the next topic that we were going to talk about here. And that is, I had it earlier. I apologize. Conversation's getting me. A little bit about the cost of armor, and we kind of talked about keeping it cheap. But let's jump into that next part, because it's going to kind of reasonable cost for helm is going to fall under this as well. Let's talk about armorers a little bit and what you have to watch for. And when you spend money, what's the best way to make sure you're going to get the best bang for your buck? So on my end, I purchase and resell a lot of stuff. I like buying bulk and then selling it, near cost, just because I'm trying to help our folks out and create a community. I don't like a lot of people. It's easier to know. I go out and I know I'm going to sell basket hill or Boulder basket hill. So I'll ask for a bulk price. I'll get that bulk price. And usually I add $1 or something to it, just because I know I'm going to lose one, or one's going to come back broke or something. And I'll buy 20 of them. And then over time, I'll sell those. And I do that with a lot of stuff. Back when I first started, I was doing that with, to show you how long ago, Mandrake helmets. And I went to everybody, said, okay, who needs a helmet? I'm going to get a bulk price. And instead of $185, I got them for $145. And everybody kind of jumped onto the bandwagon. I put 2 orders of 10 helmets through Mandrake at that price, and it put a bunch of people in helmets. So there is some of that bulk piece, but then you also take a gamble there, because you're not necessarily always getting something that's perfectly custom order. You're getting a lot of times, when I say bulked it, I mean, we had 20 helmets that were exact same. So that's, you don't get the, this is kind of you don't get the Harley rolling off the lot that's personally customized for you. So just be aware. You can just buy a generic helm, which is a lot easy for me to say, but a lot harder to find nowadays. What usually you'll find some of those out of people ordering from Indian armorers. They mark them up some and then they sell them. They're still reasonable now. I see helmets usually at places like Munition Grade Armor and things in that $200 to $300 range that are actually relatively nice. And then you can touch them up. You can go to Raymond Squire Press and buy brass later when you have money and add it to that. And but I think the one thing I tell every brand new person, if you're spending literally over $50 on a piece of armor, ask somebody that's been here a long time. And they will tell you if that armor is reliable, most likely. If they don't know, they know somebody that does know. They will tell you if that armor is going to probably work or not, or if they had some type of experience with it. And they'll tell you if it's just too expensive for what you're getting. I think that's the biggest key. Don't be afraid to ask people. The best part is back in the day, I didn't get a lot of people to ask. I had to find people to ask because, it was prior to really the internet. I could go on to Rialto and ask, I guess. But nowadays, you can post out there. There's SCA's Coach's Corner. There's all kinds of sites that allow you to ask those questions and get an understanding if the armor is going to deliver you or something or not. So use those resources because they're really, really important before you spend your dollars. I think that's the key. Also, seeing beautiful stuff. I got a $300 sword downstairs that I bought at my first Pennsic. I have worn it 0 times. That was one of those cases. I didn't ask. It was very cool. It's still a beautiful sword. But I could have spent that money better, like maybe getting a helmet. This is the case. I should have went back home and asked, or you should go back, sit on it and think about it before you do it. And if you're brand new, be very careful at just going out and spending thousands of dollars. I don't care if you're thinking you're getting the exact stuff you want, you probably aren't, and you're going to re-spend it over and over again. So just don't rush into things. Hjorlief, what do you got to say about that?
All right, there we go. No, I agree on that. I think you definitely don't want to rush it at all. In regards to the upgrade, I think kind of just going back a little bit, we kind of talked about earlier about the transition from sports armor. Kind of something a transition that worked really well for me and that I've kind of pitched a bunch of my guys on, and that I kind of wanted to talk about was the advantage of gambesons and kind of like sewing and stuff like that. For a long time, I don't know. I was just always kind of looking for like whatever the right next thing was going to be. And I finally was really happy with my armor, and I got mail, and I had like this really nice kind of like 550 Vendel presentation, but the look wasn't right because there wasn't like a caftan or something underneath, like that padded garment. And I was like, man, I just don't want to get overheated. I want to go to Pennsic. It's going to be like 95 with like 105 heat index. I really don't want to wear like a jacket underneath my armor. And to test it out, I went to a thrift store and I just bought a bunch of cheap blankets, and I like sewed up a caftan, and it was all synthetic fabric. It was super hot. I tested it out in winter at Cinnabar's practice, and I was like, man, this feels really good. The armor wears really well with it. It works really well, but it was super hot. So I decided I would invest like a little bit more money, and I ordered some heavyweight linen and like some cotton bamboo batting, which like sheds heat really well. And so I found that 2 layers of heavy linen and like 4 layers of that bamboo batting, oh my God, it's wonderful with mail. It's like the best protection ever. It has the advantage of being super historic. You can throw it in the washing machine, and you can make these gambesons if you're sewing them yourself and you have a machine that can do it for, I don't know, linen's gone up a bit with inflation, but I was making mine for like $200. They're probably $300 now, which is a lot of money. I'm definitely not going to say, $300 is real money, but if you're wearing mail, which is kind of, I've pitched a bunch of my guys on who are doing dark age stuff, it's kind of like a 2-part armor system. You get hit, and like the mail will kind of spread out the blow, and then the caftan underneath will kind of like redistribute it, and it works really, really, really well. So that's kind of what I've been pushing people to do on the upgrade, or recommending, just because it works really well and it's something that's really attainable. On the helmet side of things, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we live in a really interesting time right now with Ukraine and everything, but there is a lot of fantastic European armor that is available for really inexpensive prices. Generally, kind of to the historical mean versus what people have historically paid for American armorers. I originally got into making helmets for myself because what I wanted didn't exist. I wanted a very particular Valsgard 5 helmet that just wasn't made by anybody. I mean, there's a couple of guys over in Poland making like dress versions of it. And so I just kind of started working on those until I eventually got one that I liked. And I'll grab it here to actually kind of show some stuff on it because they're really easy to make is kind of where I'm going with this conversation. But long story short, I think if you can find a helmet that you're happy with online for $250, $300, that's a good deal. Right now, especially with commodity prices, you're going to spend at least $100 to make a mild steel helmet, and then you're going to have whatever it takes you to do it, time and equipment and whatnot. And the equipment's not hard. You can build a helmet, with a piece of rail, a vise, a ball peen hammer, and a stump. Those are the only pieces and a drill. Those are the only necessary pieces of equipment you need to build a helmet. But if you don't have the time or attention to do that, I'd recommend, look at those European armors, see what you can find. Definitely pay for 12 gauge. When you buy a helmet from India or from the Ukraine or from wherever, usually those helmets are like on the thinner side of 14 if they say they're 14. I mean, because if you buy metal, like there's a range. And so I always recommend, definitely pay up. Calibration across the society has kind of increased over the last couple of years. And and I think that's a function of the wonderful training we've all been doing in body mechanics. And, I think there's a lot more martial arts in SCA combat now than there used to be in the science and understanding of that. But the unfortunate reality is that means we're all getting hit harder too. And so, when it comes to helmets, force plus mass equals concussion risk. You can't control the force you're being hit, but you can control the mass. And so whenever I make helmets with people, we always do, 12 gauge, because I think that's the way to go. But yeah, if you are inclined to make a helmet, there's some patterns I posted up. But again, not to overly push the dark age, but there's a lot of easy stuff you can do. So what I want to point out in this helmet, this is my rendition of like a Velsguard 5 top. What you're going to see is I went to Elro, the metal store, and I had them cut me a bunch of 12 gauge. I bought, originally I think I just bought scrap, but go to Elro and get them to cut you a bunch of 2-inch strips of steel on their industrial shear. They're going to charge you like $10 to do this, but it's going to save you a ton of time. And once you get those 2-inch strips, you can basically use that for all kinds of stuff. You can use it for your entire brow band. You can use it for the band up the top. You can use it for your supports on the side. And from a construction standpoint, the miracle of this helmet is, unlike later period helmets, like a Soleil, for example, that historically was raised out of one giant piece of metal and would take like a mastersmith 200 hours to produce. This is made out of a bunch of small pieces of metal that are really easy to shape and then are all kind of put together. So, you've got a complex curve here, but this curve only has to go from here to here, right? Same thing. This curve only has to go from here to here. And so this helmet is actually even easier than kind of the quadrant spangle, because you get to spread the curve over these two pieces. And so with a little bit of time, it's really easy to actually produce, something that turns out pretty decent. Because the Iron Age helmets in particular are just not super hard to do. I always tell people when they start armoring, that's definitely the place you probably want to start, because if you can, it's just more accessible, I guess, is the way to go. A lot of the later period helmets you see that are out there are, produced with welding, which is fine and wonderful, but we don't produce helmets that way anymore. But with those, you don't even need a welder. I shout out to Gray Cat. Gray Cat, I think, Gray Cat Armory, graycat.com, I believe, is the guy who is currently selling the Zwerhammer Velsguard 6 kits. You see those really commonly. With inflation, I think that kit now costs $125. It used to cost like $100, but for $125, Gray Cat will send you 12 gauge laser cut kit to put together a helmet. They're super cheap. It's probably a 15-hour project if you don't know what you're doing. All you need is a hammer, a stump, and a vise. He even sends the rivets you need to put it together with. So, for literally $125 shipped, you can have a helmet that's going to turn out really good. One of my guys up here bought one of those kits, and we modified it a bit just so it looked a little bit different, because there's probably 400 of those helmets. If you go to Penzic, like, you'll see them all over the place, because they're just a bomb-proof, really affordable helmet. But they're also easy to modify. It doesn't take much to kind of change up a little bit on there to give them a little bit of differentiation. But yeah, my takeaway is just, if you've got a little bit of shop space, an Iron Age helmet is really easy to produce. You can probably do it, from Gay Cat for $125 if you want a Velsguard 6. If you want something what I built, you can make any of the Velsguard or Vendel Gravefind helmets for, probably under $150 in materials. It's just going to take your time and attention. And, and also something I just say in my helmet workshops, because a bunch of my guys have made a whole bunch of these helmets now. I just tell them, be kind to yourself. This is your first helmet. You're not married to it. You don't have to fight with it for 20 years. This is just something to get yourself onto the field and to fight with and to enjoy. And, a couple of years from now, if you want to go in a different direction or you want to build something different, you can use the skills that you built within yourself making this project to go on and build whatever your next helmet's going to be. So.
Yeah, and I agree. I've seen a lot of helmets come in. The good part about building your own helmet in that case, and we had a couple of guys around here that did the same with the kits, is that you get some armoring sense as well. You learn how to pound rivets. You learn how to do a little bit of work on the metal, and that goes a long way. If you're in the SCA for fixing your gear and fixing things here and there. And the first thing I do almost with everyone that comes in a shop is teach them how to sew leather together and show them how to actually pound a rivet. And sometimes that rivet is a roofing nail and a penny with a hole in it. But it's the idea is that it's all what they can afford.
All my rivets when I first started were just 12D nails.
Yep.
Because you couldn't actually buy rivets now. I should say that really quick, actually, to put in our show notes or whatever else. But rivetsinstock.com. JC Rivets, they're the #1 rivet provider in the world. Excellent source of rivets. They'll give you exactly what you order spec wise. The quality is outstanding. The prices are reasonable. So at jcrivets.com. And as Grace points out, man, that's exactly it. Even if you buy a helmet from the Ukraine, it doesn't mean it's going to be dent free or maintenance free. So at some point you're going to have to learn how to pound a rivet and to do some of those things. And they're wonderful skills to have.
Yep. So Wolverine.
All right. Since we're talking helmets, I figure we should probably talk padding really quick because we have an old go-to in the SCA for a number of years of camp foam. And I know like in the mid-roam, we have basically outlawed that blue camp foam that you can just buy at Walmart. That's actually not very good against concussions. So yes, go to a heavier helmet, go to something 12 gauge, make sure it's solid because of the mass. But the other part of the equation is the force has to go somewhere. And it either goes through your head or it goes through the helmet or it goes through some padding, taking that force out. There's a number of things that have been developed over the years. It gets to be a little more pricey. I know people use thicker foam. There's like the black foam. I can't think of what it's called right now. But if you can afford it, some of the best things to go to is some of the military pads. This is the 3/4 inch pad. It's gone up in price. Oregon Aero is where I tend to buy them at, but they're really good. They're made to take concussion forces. They put them in military helmets. That I used to have headaches all the time when I did gunfighting. And I think it was the pressure. It might have been from fighting. I switched to these and I haven't had any issues. So this is one of the things you can put in the helmet are these military pads. They've got a top of the head pad. It comes with, I think at least 2 of the square ones and 4 more rectangular ones. This is one of the 1/2 inch. They don't make them as much anymore. They work. They don't feel as sturdy as the 3/4 do. The other thing that people have been putting in their helmet, and don't feel like you have to stop at 1/2 inch. There are people that are putting, I use 3/4 of an inch padding in my helmet. You can use multiple sizes. There is the 1/8 inch Shock Tech, which is also developed to remove force. Other things people are using is stuff like Second Skull. So you can put in the 1/2 inch of padding, but this is actually made for people who do bats or batting at baseball. And so if they were to get hit in the head with a baseball, it's taking the force out of that. And they don't wear a lot besides their helmet, which has a lot less mass than what we wear. So think about what you're putting on your head. Don't just rush out to buy a helmet, talk to people, watch your prices, check what the gauge is. I've seen people jump in and end up with a helmet that's no good. So think about that. Think about the padding that you're going into it. There's also something called gyro that they put on football helmets. So just do a little bit of research, make it padding fit. If it doesn't fit right, it's going to cause headaches. And don't be afraid to spend money. It's your head. You need it to keep learning and playing this sport.
Yeah, I can't agree enough. And, you know, a comfortable helm allows you to stay out longer, which allows you to get better. I mean, that's really, when you come down to it, it's the time on the field. And you know, that's having something comfortable and, you know, when you're done not having a concussion or not having headaches goes a long way to wanting to come back and do it again. So, and that's a great one. You know, there's lots of the good black padding out there. There is that you can go to, like foam factories and things to pick up. There's some online places. I will try to, I have a couple of places I will put up some specs of foam on the in the document we put out, and probably even just add a couple comments here on this so that people can see it and order from them. We use those all the time. We have a pattern that's essentially like a octopus. It's a flat pattern, and we cut a bunch of V's in the top. And so when it goes in the helmet, it just kind of, those V's come together and you got a helmet pad. And then, you know, and then I put some shock tech under that, and it's usually really pretty much good to go. So, you know, the idea is just like Wolverine said, you know, it's well worth the money. If you're going to skimp on some things, you can skimp on straps, and you can use, you know, shoe cord and all of those other things, because to tell you the truth, they'll last longer, most likely. Don't skimp on your padding too much. It pays off in the long run so much. So, Bess, do you have anything on armors? And what did you have to do when you were you had to deal with lots of armors, I'm sure.
I just want to address one thing. So when it comes to armor and armoring and helms, I have zero faith in my ability.
Yeah.
For all that I, you know, in the early days made a helm, to this day, I don't think that I would trust my brain to me. So I understand that some people really, you know, making a helm for 125 is great. I think I would be too nervous to do that. That's just me. You know, you guys, if you've got the skills and the abilities, I like, hey, go for it.
It's totally accessible, Beth. You should do it. I gotta edge it here to just really encourage you. It's totally accessible. I totally believe in you. We'll chat you through it. You could do it.
So I will say though, the helm is the one thing that I'm willing to spend a little bit more money on, and the padding. We really are seeing and hearing so much more about repeated blows, even if you're not getting a concussion from a single shot, but repeated blows to the head. Even if the cumulative trauma is what we're seeing and hearing a lot about. So yeah, really great padding. The other thing, a solution to a period problem, of course, is suspension padding. I used it for my Battle of the Nations helmet, and it really works quite well. I think you could probably, I myself don't have a pattern for it, but I know they're available. So I always like going with a period solution to a period problem, you know, brain spilling out. So that's what I got on helms anyhow. When it comes to rivets though, I'm terrible with rivets. I'm awful with rivets. So now I just sew everything together. Yes. Sewing is also a perfectly period way of doing it. And I found that with rivets, when the leather goes on them, it really kind of hacks up the leather. If you have rivets, but with sewing, it doesn't hack up the leather. It's you can re-sew it if you have to. In fact, this belt, I can see that at one point I had some rivets in here. I pulled them out for whatever reason and punched in 2 more holes. They're cheaper. All you need is some, in this case, it was fake sinew and a sewing needle, a big darning needle. And it really lasts. Like, I am surprised at how well sewing things really lasts. it doesn't rot out. When I sweat on it, it doesn't, corrode. Says something about my personality, but it doesn't corrode and it sticks around for a long time. So Brannos, while you may teach people how to rivet, and at times you've got to be able to do it. Whenever I can, I sew.
No, I agree. And I'll tell you, if it's with leather, you sew. I mean, I used to rivet all the time, and we had huge issues with just rot of the leather and corrosion and all of those pieces. And then repair was a nightmare. Sewing lasts so much longer. It's truly amazing. We use a lot of just punch holes and just paracord together or shoelace together, because when that breaks, it's super easy to fix. So, sometimes the easy, sometimes there's the straps and all that looks great, but if it's underneath, who cares? And the key is minimal, a shoelace almost lasts forever compared to a piece of leather that you have to take care of. What do you got?
So you talk about this. These are the plates from my body armor.
Yeah.
When I first made it, I had these little red shoelaces, and
Yeah.
I tied them on to see if the plates were good and in the right place. That was about 22 years ago. Turns out these little cords, these little shoelaces have stayed on really well. Occasionally I have to replace it with a black shoelace. And I will admit that in some cases I have actually gone all out and sewed them into place. But really, shoelaces last.
Yes, they do.
They're designed to be sweat on, so it works. Sewing and shoelaces, that's my go-to.
Yeah, I can't agree more. It's just it's a super easy method that lasts a long time. So just something to pass along. Somebody in the forums also brought up, and there's a lot of great things popping up in the forums, and thanks to get some great folks chatting out there. But somebody did mention, head and hands. Those are things you want to protect and spend a little money on. Sir Braun mentioned, one thing we think about getting foam, but then we don't think about replacing it when it's due, right? So, you really do want to think about looking at your foam in your helmet every so often. And, I would suggest almost every season, just take it out, wash it, take a look and see if it's actually padding anymore, and again, it's your head. So that's a big piece there. Last one, last point there is there's lots of armorers out there, but not a lot of them actually carry day-to-day stuff. Windrose carried some day-to-day stuff, and there's a few. Master Eric carries a lot of day-to-day stuff, including foam and including anti-concussion foam. He's I think Munition Grades Arms is a shop name, but everybody knows him as Master Eric, the rattan guy. So he carries a lot of really good stuff. Hey Tristan, you've done a lot of armor. Why don't you tell us? Maybe you can jump on real quick and tell us some tricks.
Some tricks. Well, firstly, yeah, I've always found the helmet and the gauntlets that's the most intimate relationship you're going to have with your armor. And it pays to, when you pad a helmet, prepare to repad it, and then prepare to repad it a third time. Get it right. Don't just slap foam in there, and it takes some kind of trial and error, kind of like a mechanic working on a race car, always tuning it to get it to where you want it to be, to have that helm resting where it is. But I was fortunate enough, and I'll kind of jump back to the original question, in our group, we had a pretty good armoring presence, having an armoring laurel here in the Twin Cities. So I got to get some fairly good mentoring, but the first suit of armor that I had, actually I had to borrow it after somebody else was done using it to practice it. And believe me, that was a handcrafted experience. And it was just like you described. It was a barrel that was cut a front and a back. It was brown, and it was painted this rusty orange, and we called it the Lobster. And it had shoulders and hip plates and the whole 9 yards. And what I found was, like what most people find, I could make the legs, the body armor, the elbows, basically everything except the helmet. I was borrowing the helmet. And one event coming up on a Saturday, the helmet that I was going to borrow was not available. And in a flurry, I went in one night and I made a barrel helmet. It was a Wednesday night. I was working till like 2 a.m. so that I could go to the event on Saturday and crank this thing out. And I fought in that thing for like 4 years. It was just 16 gauge, and eventually it got narrower and narrower and narrower.
Oh,
Just
oh
because it
man.
built up over time. But it was one of those total act of desperation. I need a helmet or I'm not gonna be able to fight. And eventually, I went on to other stuff. But I would say that one of the biggest advantages we have now versus what we had then, because I mean, the way we cut metal was you either did it a shear, they called it a nibbler, this like power thing. One of the most scary tools you could ever imagine. But there are now fairly cheap things like small unit plasma cutters where you can just like a wand, you can cut metal out with it. There are a lot of people that have CNC, either CNC plasma cutters. So if you have a pattern, you take it to them, they scan it and they just go, and they can cut that thing out for you. Or I think there's also a laser and there's like a water jet cutter. And there are also a lot more small fabrication shops that will do the cutting for you. There's some creative options. There's also shops that will often let you come in with your project and they'll help you make it. I know there's woodworking shops that are like co-ops that way. I don't know if some places may have metal shops that'll do that, but fabricators are kind of like artists. They always love having somebody come in with some goofy project. And if you can find one of those, I mean, just like anything, things are easier when you find help, and try not to necessarily just jump into it all on your own. But the easiest stuff, and you guys have covered a lot of this, the easier stuff to do is the body armor, the legs and elbows, that sort of thing. I remember getting into the plastics pretty early. And one of the things that was popular back in that era was, because it was so easy to heat form, was Kydex. And from there, unfortunately, Kydex is pretty flexible. So it heat forms really easy, doesn't buckle, but it also cracks pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really provide a lot of protection. Then we found ABS, which I think is probably one of the easiest things, plastics to work with. It's readily accessible, heat forms really well. We would just do it in a low temperature oven. We'd make forms, just out of metal, or we even use wood or whatever you've got to, some object that you've got a curve, and just hold it down on there. And I mean, we've made a ton of all kinds of different armor pieces out of the ABS, and it's a dream to work with. So yeah, it's kind of my little filibuster on getting armor.
No, it's good. And, I think people don't think about it a lot of times, but there's a lot of videos out there of people doing like Star Wars armor and cosplay and stuff like that show how to actually form stuff and make stuff. Don't pass those up, because believe it or not, they have some great ideas. They spend a lot of time doing this, just like many of us. So, there's a lot of opportunity there. I'm going to go on to the next item. Is like, where's your favorite places to go to find stuff? I know mine, I go to Goodwill, and I'll find kids baseball greaves and I look for the ones that are specifically extra deep. And then I just cut the bottom of the greave off, and I got an elbow cup. I put a string on it, because it still has padding in it, put a string across it, or get a neoprene elbow brace and tie it in. And I have a pair of elbows for loaner gear, and they're absolutely fantastic. When they break, who cares? They were $5. I move on. So I do that. Garage sales. Somebody brought that up. Ian online brought garage sales. I remember garage sailing all the time to find stuff, because a lot of times I go to garage sales now and I look up in the rafters and stuff. Like some people will have stuff or estate sales, and they'll be up in the rafters, because I know they're selling everything, and they don't care about like stuff that's not made. So I'm like, hey, you got a lot of nice wood, or you got some big pieces of steel up there. What are you doing with that? And so, I've collected all this kind of things over the years, and I've collected a lot of free steel. And I used to get this was everybody come in at armoring, and the goal was, it's like, hey, where do you work? And if they're scrapping anything, think if it can be used for us. My brother used to work at a shop. The end roll was scrapped all the time. I got full, 10-foot sheets of end roll of 16 gauge steel all the time, and we just chop it, he'd roll it and throw it in the bed in my thing, and we chop it up, and anybody could use it. And we were pounding steel. So, there's lots of ways to keep it cheap for people. And if that is the same thing, I buy bulk edging, 200. I usually buy 200 foot of edging, sell it for $1 a foot, which it runs like 90 cents a foot or something. But at least everybody can just buy edging. It's available for them, so they get their shields done really quick and things like that. So, but yeah, Goodwill, garage sales. All of that, those are usually my places I love going. Played Against Sports used to be, it's not what it was, but what kind of places you go to, Hjorlief? Obviously you go to the hardware department over at where was that?
Man, I always joke I'm like the wraith of like St. Denis up here. If anybody ever wonders why they can't find like a belt or anything else, it's because I go in there every 3 weeks and clean them out. I go to St. Vinny's. I go to downstate. I used to go to Goodwill all the time. We actually don't have a lot of thrift stores up here. We used to, but I go to the ones we have. I'm constantly looking for hockey pants, like used hockey pants, because you can just attach like a pair of knee caps to the bottom, and that'll work as a loaner pair of knees. I'm looking for belts all the time because you can use the buckles, you can use the leather for straps, you can use all that kind of stuff. I look for like motocross or like old catcher's knees, for like baseball. Yep. Cut those off and modify them. I think Wolverine actually had a pair she showed earlier that it had like a little tab put on. Sometimes you got to extend the wing out a little bit. But yeah, I just troll through there, every couple of weeks. I'm like, man, I haven't been through there. I should go see if they put anything else out. Go wander through Sporting Goods, see what they got. I mean, I'm sure they'd think I'm a crazy person because they're like, what's this guy doing with all this stuff? But that's what I do.
All right, Wolverine, where do you go?
I used to hit Goodwill a lot. You just go ahead and go into their belt section and buy a bunch of $1 belts, and you've got essentially both the strap and the buckle, and you're done. Occasionally, you can find purses that have a million buckles on them as a fashion statement.
Oh, yes,
they become very good buckles for armor. I think where else I've gone, definitely played Against Sports in the past. As you said, it's not quite the same. I haven't picked it up, but people that I know have, you can get decommissioned road signs. So you can get like a decommissioned stop sign, and you just cut the edges off, put in a hole, and you got to, put in the shield boss. You can get them online, and they come in various states of decay. Sometimes they're very clean. Other times they've been graffitied or they're bent. And it was like $30-$40 for decommissioned stop sign that you can use as a 30-inch shield.
Yeah.
So.
No, those are all good. I forgot the stop signs and the signs bit because that was a big thing in the past. You still see that. Right?
Hey, really quick. I just wanted to throw in there for steel. Actually, most places have like an Alro Metal Plus, which it's a steel distributor. But the cool thing they let you do is you can go through their showroom, and they almost always have a very robust kind of a drop cut section. And for a long time, I haven't been there now because we don't have one up here, but there's one like in Ann Arbor. Most metro cities have one. Like there's one in Milwaukee, there's one outside of Ann Arbor, there's one in coast of Detroit. There's a bunch of them. Anyway, people will order like these giant industrial steel orders or whatever, and whatever gets cut off, like if someone orders like a 12-foot sheet or something like that and they only need 8, they put the 4 feet in the scrap box, and you can buy it for, you used to be able to buy it for like 89 cents a pound. I always joked you could buy steel cheaper than you could buy chicken breast, which seemed crazy since you have to mine the steel out of the ground, but or mine the iron out of the ground and mix it and blah blah blah.
Yeah, no kidding.
But it's just amazing to me that it was that inexpensive. But yeah, so Elrose Metal Plus, I think has got by far, if you buy their drop steel, by far the cheapest metal you're going to find anywhere. And then I know people that don't have that, you can do like McMaster Car. Will send you like up to a 4x4 sheet, I think, via mail. The shipping's expensive, but
Yes.
you know, it just kind of is what it is. So
that is the biggest part, is usually shipping on steel. And I've gone to Alro and picked up aluminum, T6 6061.10 aluminum there for half the price I usually buy it for. And I buy and sell that stuff all the time. So yeah, we have a giant warehouse of Alro cutoffs around. So, and there are definitely some good prices. Yeah, I think that it was all good stuff. I would agree. Bess, do you have any places you go and specifically look for anything?
I like surplus stores. You
Yeah.
never know what you're going to find, but if you're in at the right place, you can find some pretty cool stuff in surplus stores. And I'm still a play it again sportswoman.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I wish ours just didn't. Ours doesn't carry enough used stuff anymore. So
Ours kind of, during the pandemic, of course, they were closed down for a lot and they weren't taking the stuff in.
oh yeah.
But everybody, I'm sure, for the pandemic has been buying equipment, and I'm waiting to see the rush of stuff that goes to Play It Again Sports, because there'll be things available there. I'm absolutely certain.
Well, did you get your shield basket from Play It Again Sports?
Yeah. So for those, we were talking about this earlier. Up here in Canada, we're a hockey nation. So I use face masks. I go and I buy them a couple. This one was $14.99 Canadian, little tiny Canadian dollars. They're designed to stop a puck to the face, so they're going to work on your hands. And so a lot of us up here use them, and they're lightweight. They're easy to use. They're easy to attach. So that's what I use. And actually, several of us up here do. We use them for our shields for hand protection.
No, we actually have a couple of people that use those here as well. So, and they work great, and easy to mount, I have to say. All right. So here's a question that somebody threw out, and just so for everybody else, hockey stuff, baseball stuff, lacrosse stuff, motocross stuff. All of those places, I've seen guys. There's a couple of other sports that have some things in it. Some of the street hockey stuff is very good. I find that a lot of the lacrosse stuff, don't do the lacrosse gloves because they don't have wrist support, but a lot of lacrosse stuff, especially the rib pads, work perfectly and they're made to move in. So just things to look for. We're kind of running, we got about 10 or going almost 10 minutes here. What's the most difficult piece of armor to find / fit you? Obviously the helmet. So, we'll throw that one out right away. I would say sometimes shoulders are rough. And we all know we can't find a good pair of gauntlets unless you buy a pair of Gretters. I'm free. I get free Gretted. I get free gauntlets after I mention it 2,200 times. So I'm on 3 now. But really, I've had so many different pair of full gauntlets that just barely do the job. Those are, I'd say, helmet gauntlets. The two things you want the most are the two things that are hardest to find. What do you think, Hjorlief?
I agree on that, man. I don't know. Can I get on your Gretter program? Yeah, I think so. Like I said earlier, I couldn't find the helmet I wanted, so that's why I started making helmets originally. But I think actually now you can buy it. So gauntlets, yeah. A bunch of people, I guess, is putting this out there because it's a fairly inexpensive option, but Quilted Armor has a vendor they work with where they sell a padded gauntlet that's got spring treated plates under chain. They're not Gretter protection. I think if you're going to fight like spear a lot, they're probably really good. They're kind of like an upgrade from the brig mittens everybody bought a couple of, I don't know, probably 10 years ago or so. I think that's when I bought my first pair that were also covered in mail. And those had like I don't know. These are just like kind of the next iteration of those. They're like $300 for $300. They're pretty decent. I have seen people, and I think it's like Trade Winds of the Levant, which is like the Dale Hopton deal. I've seen people get gauntlets from him before they have been semi-happy with for not big money, under $200. I think the deal there though is the recommendation is you want to see it. You want to see how it fits. So if you're going to buy from there, preferably you want to buy at an event, or you want to buy in a location where you can actually try them on. And honestly, to tell you the truth, outside of the quilted armor ones, because I've seen so many people's that have bought those and they're all exactly the same, I'd feel confident buying those online, and I'd feel confident buying Gretters, and that's about it. I think for anybody else, I'd probably want to try it on at the table, because that's just the hardest part to armor. Everyone's fingers are a little bit longer. Some people have wider palms, some people have thinner palms. Generally, I guess to put out there, I always counsel my new guys that, mitten gauntlets, conversely, you think like, oh, mitten, I won't be able to grip as well. But like, if you have like individual fingers in a glove sewn into a mitten, kind of offers like the peak performance to cost to protection ratio. So that's what I always recommend for people. And then I think the other difficult to armor piece, and Wolverine, I think, has got some good things on this, so we'll pivot to her in a second, but it's actually the torso, just because there's a lot of different body styles out there. And so I got lucky up here where one of the guys that joined my group really early on, kind of just on his own, was like really kind of into like Japanese armor. And so he had made a bunch of different kind of like samurai era, kind of like 1600, Edo period body harnesses. And he got really good at kind of patterning those out. So we have, and again, I took some pictures. We made a variable one that we actually make out of plastic that we've kind of put under for people. And so we've cranked out a bunch of those, and you can really adjust those, based on people's height, based on people's weight, based on, just where the weight and, distribution is at. And those have been really handy. And that's something we can hammer out for, cheap. We're making those for, under $10 a piece. So.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. And that's the way to go. We did that with some just plastic plates that we just literally laced together, and you had a buckle on one side, and you would just lace it around and buckle it, and you had like a strap, and it's adjustable, and they had body armor on. You just strap it on and go.
I think Sir Lionel's still fighting in there.
He's
right?
still fighting in that stuff. You got it, man. Too funny. Wolverine, what would you say? Helm gauntlets too?
Yeah, most definitely helm and gauntlets. I run into the opposite issue of a lot of people is I'm on the smaller side for a fighter. I'm all of like 4'10", and like for my rapier kit, I've got to wear the extra small gloves from Darkwood. I've got an extra small rapier mask, and I just can't find that on the armored side. Anything I get as far as helmet, I got very lucky with my first helmet, and that fit. We did end up having to cut off the bottom ring, bottom bar. So we cut like an inch off because it was too long. I have a helmet that is slowly being put together for an upgrade for me, and the guy made it, and he was like, "Why'd you cut the bottom off?" I'm like, "It's too long." He's like, "What do you mean it's too long?" It's like, it's too long. The short neck, in comparison to my size. So finding a helmet for me that fits and is in my time period is just impossible. Gauntlets are also a problem. They're always made for people with like, medium, large size hands. I even have a trouble finding just regular gloves in the women's department because a lot of them tend to be very slender. So they'll be thinner palms and long fingers, as opposed to a thicker palm and shorter fingers from having, done sports all my life. So finding stuff like that is just really hard. Everything else is a little bit easier to custom fit. I don't have as much trouble with chest armor as some women do because of how I design it to sit. I don't have a lot of chest to work around as some do either, but yeah, for me, a lot of it is hands. A lot of it is hands, a lot of it is helmet.
Yep. I'm gonna go ahead and move this up. Sorry, Bess, I'm gonna drop that off. And we're gonna pop right to the last piece. I think the last piece is important here, and that is, the last kind of topic we're gonna cover, and then we got 5 minutes to kind of cover it real quick. But what's next? And what I think what we meant by what's next is, once we end that basic armor, we gave lots of people ideas of how to get into basic armor. But when is it time to move up? And is there a good time to do that? I mean, for me, to tell you the truth, it was after I rained, to tell you the truth. Most of mine was soft kit and a nice helmet. And I really didn't start, it was almost a second rain where I started finally narrowing down. I'm like, you know what? I really do want to do the 12th century. I know exactly what armor I want. I went very simple, really, because I fell into that. I want to look more like a reenactor than all of this really blingy stuff that really, one out of 1,000 guys would have on a field. And so I wanted to be, the one out of, I wanted to be the 999 guys, type of look. And so I went with something really simple. But it probably took me 15 years to get there. And then I started working on it. So for me, I think it was when I really decided to do something more historical is when I ended up kind of moving up my armor. Hjorlief, what made you kind of move up yours?
I started off from that plastic armor. I was trying to find a picture and I cannot for the life of me, but it was a pretty decent rendition of like late 15th century German plate. And so I switched because I was over armored. Because I had like a full horseman suit of armor, and it was just too much. And at the time, a bunch of my friends were doing Viking Age stuff, and they're like, "Oh, that's pretty cool." And so I started looking into that, and then I was kind of just like generic Age Viking. And then I was like, "Man, I really like a lot of the jewelry and a lot of the accoutrement from the Vendel Age." And so I kind of went back another 200 years, and then I just kind of from there, honestly, form kind of led function. I just kind of wanted to find the right stuff, and it just worked out for me that the ideal look was basically low profile, and worked with the gambeson and was male, and just it wears well, it fights well, you're not fighting your armor all the time. And so I kind of tell anybody who's interested in that kind of style just to when you're tired of fighting your armor, when you want something that's just going to be really easy to wear and whatever, that's maybe the time to look at it. But I don't know, I try not to push people in that direction, actually. I think it's important, especially for the first number of years, to just show up and have fun. I think it's easy, I think, sometimes to lose focus, like when you're in a position where, like, I've been doing this for 20 years now, and so like the things I find joy in might be different than like what somebody who's only been doing it for like a couple of years finds joy in.
Totally agree.
And I don't want to rob anybody of that experience, so I generally don't actually push people into that kind of stuff, which I think people will be surprised because they see me and they see like other people around me, like, man, they all look like, those guys are all like Hjorlief knockoffs. Well, I'm not telling them to do that. I mean, like, it's not
right. Yeah.
But I think it happens because people will blow my armor. Sometimes like we'll get to practice and like we're all the stuff loaned out. And if everyone's loaned out, then somebody wears mine. And so if somebody's wearing mine, they're like, man, this is really comfortable. This works really well. And pretty soon they're like, yeah, man, I just, I called all the best stuff. I ordered a $200 shirt of mail. I got a cheap gambeson, and now I look just like you. And I don't think they're doing it because they want to look like me. I think they're doing it because it works really well. And the form of it feels really well, and so you kind of get, with Iron Age stuff, you get the advantage of the form and the presentation look good, but it also, you're not fighting your armor the whole time, and so there's a real practicality aspect to it.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? Is if when you're ready to make that move, I don't care if you're buying it or making it or changing your time period, is find something that fits very well, and it will bring up your level of fighting over time because you're not fighting your armor. It allows you to get out of that headspace of fight against your armor and fight against your opponent. So I think that's a super important place to go to. And if you happen to be able to upgrade your kit while you're doing that, more the bonus.
Yeah, and really quick, I know we're gonna move on to something else, but like Sir Jason Ironfist from Cinnabar told me, it stuck with me. I tell everybody else this. Like, a lot of times that prowess thing is exactly that. Like, I don't think you realize how much you're fighting your armor sometimes. like the one that stands back with me is like I just cut the fingers off my gloves. So my actual finger could like touch my sword. That was probably like a 2% difference. I felt like I was literally like 2% better after doing that. I remember talking to you. I'd made like these spring steel gauntlets I was really happy with, but the reality was, they were light and they looked all right, but they were binding up with the basket. You're like, dude, you just need to make some other ones. And I fought it for like a year and a half because I was really happy with what I made. But finally I was like, man, I don't know, man. I guess he knows what he's talking about. I guess I should try it. And I made like these simple leather half gauntlets that I still use to this day. And they're wonderful. And I've told everybody the same thing. And so I think if you can just find ways to be comfortable in your armor, you're going to find that performance really, really goes with. Okay, that's it.
Okay, Wolverine, do you have any quick stuff to say on that?
I'm going to go to, I agree with him on sometimes refining your armor. I had a flat snap technique I was working on, and I could do it on the Pell. I could do it on the Pell. And I go to practice and I'm like, why am I not getting this? And I realized it was actually catching my gauntlet. So I had to like readjust the demi gauntlet because the basket was catching, and I don't have that issue when I'm not wearing armor going to the Pell.
Yeah.
As far as like moving up and improving gear, my big change was really just getting out of college and getting a big kid job, and starting to be able to spend money on some of the improvements or commission some of them. My kit is late period German Landsknecht, and I didn't realize it when I picked it 15 some years ago, starting out, that you didn't really wear armor as a Landsknecht. A lot of it was non-existent. So finding out that, okay, it's hidden armor and a lot of sewing. What's the thing I still can't do well 15 years later in the SCA? Sewing.
Nice.
So some of it has just been over time. Over time it's oh man, I really want this to fit better, so I'm going to replace this piece. Oh, this is fighting me. Let's replace this piece. Okay. And one thing I really like, that's been passed down to me from my night, is the idea of the 10% rule. Every year do 10%. You don't have to do big changes. It's just maybe replace that tunic, maybe replace that elbow harness. Maybe it's a big 10% and it's more like 25 and get a new helmet. It does not have to be big changes, but 10% every year. And that kind of gives you a benchmark of, all right, what's my one improvement this year? It doesn't have to be a lot of money. It could be a new shield. It could be a new tunic. It can be a new helmet, but just 10%, and slowly build your kit.
Yep. It could be just new shield paint. So new heraldry. That's it goes a long way for sure. Bess, do you have any quick stuff on this?
Well, actually, I do. So I have a Viking household, or more the point, I'm in a Viking household, and I'm sort of, 13th, 14th century for all that I goof about being early SCA. I'm thinking about getting a Viking kit so I fit in better with them, because there are all these Viking guys out on the field, and there's Bess, 13th, 14th century type look. So I'm thinking of doing that.
Awesome. But I guess the best part for you, Bess, is that you're at a point of life that that's a lot easier too, right?
Yeah.
That's the good point. So, and I think that's a big piece. Money comes, it's we all have to be careful about how we spend. Don't spend all your money on a helmet when you still have to pay bills. But I think it's that 10% rule. I don't buy a new helmet every year, but maybe every 10 years I should, and upgrade, or I save that money type of deal. And I think we put money at where we want it to go, and we just have to be smart about it. And the biggest thing I think comes out of this, out of what everybody's talking about, is finding that look that you want to be. Bess wants to be kind of part of the community that she's in, and really for Wolverine, she picked the right thing, because just like Hjorlief, it really it's coming down to being a little bit comfortable in what you wear, and making sure that it's not fighting you, and upgrading your fighting that way. So, what I would say to everybody here is, to wrap up the show is, first is thanks everybody, especially you, Wolverine and Hjorlief, for coming on the show and showing this stuff, and talking about it, because I think it's super important. And there's a couple of people online that said, oh, this is the perfect time because I'm just putting stuff together or getting out of loaner gear. Is I think the big piece is you see that for all of us, we don't necessarily have some period perfect kit, and we didn't spend thousands of dollars on armor, even though I know I'd love to, but I don't. You know, the key is that some of the most important pieces is kind of maybe fitting in a little bit, being part of the community, being comfortable seemed like one of the biggest things. And there's a lot of ways to get there. And it's a test, because tell you the truth, what you're comfortable in and what I'm comfortable in may be totally different things. So, you know, we had another show on fit and feel of armor, and I think that's a big one. Maybe I'll find it and post it up as well. So just to remind people after this show, we'll be putting a document together a little bit. I know I'm gonna point at Wolverine and work with her to put a document together, because she's awesome, and she does this kind of stuff all the time, and sharing it. And I'd really like to thank our audience, because you know, really this is why we're doing it, and the conversations. I mean, there's a lot of people here that you know, I know a number of nights online. I think we even had a queen online there for a while, and she had a couple things. She's mentioned Vocalo's box gauntlets, and she is right. They do a pretty nice job. But you know, it's the key here is, again, you know, try to, you know, help yourself, help others, and the biggest piece is get people on the field, and let's get going. You know, and I look forward to seeing everybody's armor, their new armor, their old armor, their new friends in armor, all of those things. I think it's going to be great. Hey, Tristan, do you know what we got next week?
I don't think we have anything scheduled yet.
I know, you're 100% right. We were just talking about that. You know, this is one of those times. So next week is the surprise week. We have to do our homework, and we have to make up an episode, but we have we have lots of episodes that people have suggested over time. We may fall back into a book episode, right, Tristan? Maybe
which episode?
Something on maybe pull a book out and dive in, right?
Yep, we were talking about possibly analyzing Book of Five Rings. You've got a couple of books you've been really digging into.
Oh my God, man, I am so hooked. It's terrible.
Yep.
I want to be a chess master now. But anyway,
episode 2, I remember playing chess with Rongwalder and playing chess with Osis, and they fought exactly the same way they played chess.
It is a thing. 100% real. I agree.
Yep.
So yeah, it's I just finished a book on that. So yeah, we'll surprise. Hopefully we'll have a great episode. We'll surprise some people with some stuff, and we look forward to having everybody back. Please send, if you have any suggestions of episodes, pop on SCI Coaches Corner, and maybe Tristan, maybe we'll throw some out there and say, hey, what haven't we done that you want to hear?
Yep.
And see what people's comments come back as, because
your input is always welcome.
100%. These shows are for you and really for us, because I get to learn from our guests all the time, and which is super cool. So Bess, any last words?
Don't be scared.
Yeah.
Like Tristan, you're talking about like arc welders or whatever the hell, and I'm like, I don't know how to do that, but I know how to do things with leather. So do what you can do.
Yeah. But you know, and I think the don't be scared goes a long way. Don't be scared to try to pound a rivet. Don't be scared to go ask somebody how to use an arc welder if they know how to do it, because to tell you the truth, you may learn something that you end up very good at. So this is part of life. Life is learning.
Not as hard as you think it is.
Yes, exactly.
It's doable.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody, and we look forward to seeing you next week. We'll see you at the SCA Coaches Corner, and everybody have a great weekend and a safe weekend. Thanks for coming out.
Good night, everybody.